If you've purchased a new record recently, you know they're not cheap. Easily $25 to $30 for a single LP or $30, $40 for a double LP. That's what it costs you as the consumer. But what does it cost the artist and the label to actually manufacture that album? I'll tell you on this episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, a small chain of independent record shops in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you'd like to support what we do, subscribe to our channel here on YouTube, maybe even buy a record from us at ntxvinyl.com. We ship anywhere in the US. Really appreciate your support. Today we are going to talk about the hard cost of manufacturing a vinyl record, or many vinyl records in most cases, right? Cost and the expense of records is very topical. If you're a person who has bought a new record recently, like I mentioned at the top, you know that it's not cheap. It's easily $20, $25 to $30 for a single LP. That's retail. That's what you're paying at a store, my store, any store. A double LP, $30, $40 easy, sometimes more. And if it's something a little more limited, if there's something special about it, it could be even more than that. So there's significant cost to you as a consumer, to me as a consumer, to buy new records, right? But what does it actually cost the artist? What does it actually cost the label? Why does it cost so much? I'm going to break all of that down, right? So the first thing to talk about is the music. That's where this all starts, right? So there's two different paths when you're talking about cost in regards to the music. First of all, let's just talk about music that's already readily available, meaning let's say we're talking about a reissue. The music has been recorded, it's done, it's accessible. The artist owns the rights to it. Those are all things that really, really matter. Let's just assume that's kind of scenario one. An artist records their music, they have it ready, and they just want to press it to vinyl. So the studio time, the recording time, all that's been done in the past, so it's not really getting rolled into this specific project, right? That's a pretty typical reissue, right? Now, if you don't own the rights to something as an artist, then you're going to have to license it, and there can absolutely be licensing fees, and that can get very expensive, especially if that material is owned by a large corporation like a Universal or a Sony, et cetera, right? So licensing fees can be very expensive for reissues, and that is one of the biggest things that stops albums from getting reissued, is that barrier right there, and we'll talk more about that. The other scenario is, let's say we're talking about a net new album, right? So when you talk about cost of producing an album of any kind, an album that's going to be pressed to vinyl, let's say it's going to go to digital, Spotify and Apple Music, maybe you're going to press some CDs, right? But first you got to talk about the cost of recording the music. You have studio costs, you have engineering costs, production costs, all these types of things. It can cost, on the low end, a couple $1,000s to record an album if you're being really cheap. It can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So that's the first thing to think about here is, what's the cost of the music, right? Again, if you already own it and it's been paid for long ago and you're just looking to reissue it, maybe that's not an issue, but that is important, especially for new albums, because every penny that is spent by the artist, whether it's on studio time, whether it's on artwork, whether it's on design, on manufacturing, whatever, that's all rolled into the cost of what it actually takes to manufacture that, right? So there's a couple scenarios there and variables that change the overall outcome. But the most interesting part here is getting into the manufacturing cost. That's what I really want to drill in on. So it goes without saying that when you're producing anything tangible, when you're producing something physical, that the more you make of something, the less expensive it gets per item. So if you're pressing 100 records, you're going to pay a lot more per record than if you're pressing 5,000 records. That's just the way manufacturing works. So much of the cost is in the setup process of the actual project itself. And by the time you get it all set up and you're ready to press it, the time that it takes to do all of that and get ready for it, make sure everything is buttoned up, is substantial. So the cost to actually press 100 or 200 or 300 or 1,000 isn't that great. Obviously, it takes up time, it takes up capacity on the pressing plant, but you get what I'm saying. The more you press, the cheaper it's gonna be per item. So if it's a very limited edition, it's a small run, maybe you're just a local or regional artist, you just need a couple hundred copies, you're gonna pay much more per record or per LP than if you're pressing many thousands, right? So again, we'll get into more of that as we talk. But first and foremost, you got two lanes. I've produced a lot of records. I've overseen the production of a lot of records. You've got two lanes you got to deal with. You got your audio and you got your art. Those are the first two things to deal with. So again, I talked about audio. Where's the source material? Do you have the audio? Do you have the rights to use the audio? If you own the audio and you've got the high-res files, in most cases, you know, very few people record to tape anymore. So we're talking about high-res digital files. If you've got those, then there shouldn't be much cost in regards to audio. The only real cost would be getting it remastered or mastered specifically for vinyl. That's not a huge cost. It can cost you anywhere from $50 to $100 per track. So let's say you got 10 tracks on an album, and let's say it's $100 for a mastering engineer to go on to go into that audio with trained ears and master it specifically for vinyl to make sure the dynamics are all correct and make sure all of it is balanced so it's going to sound good on record. So maybe that costs you $1,000 if you're an artist or a label to get it remastered for vinyl. Again, not a huge expense. That's audio. Art, that's another big one. Do you have in-house design? Are you a graphic designer yourself? Does your label have design services? If not, it can get very expensive, or even if so, you're going to get billed for those types of things, and that can cost a lot. Again, if this is a reissue and the art is already developed and you're just kind of reimagining it for vinyl, that's not going to cost near as much as opposed to getting with a graphic designer and coming up with a net new idea. Graphic designers are expensive. They are not cheap. They charge by the hour or by the project, and you're easily going to get charged probably a couple $1,000s to do a package that includes not only the cover, but the gatefold, the back, the inner sleeve, any inserts that you put in. All of that production cost from a design perspective adds up and goes into the total cost of the project. So you've got your audio, you've got your art, maybe you've paid a couple $1,000s just to get that solidified. And then you start talking about, okay, let's actually press this record. So how much does it cost the pressing plant, right? Well, again, it comes down to quantity. Most pressing plants won't press below 300 to 500. That's kind of the bare minimum. You can find places that may do less and they're really boutique and you're gonna get charged a whole lot when it comes to real specialty, low quantity stuff. But the majority of pressing plants will start at 300 to 500 as a minimum quantity. If you're pressing 300 to 500 records, let's just say single LPs right now. Single LPs, again, they retail for typically $25 to $30 in your record store, right? So what does it actually cost to manufacture that LP, the hard cost to the pressing plant, right? Well, if you're pressing 300 to 500 records, you may end up paying $12 to $15, or maybe $10 to $15. Let's say $10 to $15. Again, it depends on the bells and the whistles. Depends on if you're including an insert, your printed inner sleeve, are you getting it numbered, all these types of things. What kind of jacket do you want? All those things add into the cost. Do you want color vinyl versus black vinyl, right? There's lots of different variables. But as a basic range, $10 to $15 is a pretty good cost if you're pressing 300 to 500 records at the pressing plant. That's hard cost. Now, if you're pressing, let's say, a couple thousand records, that cost per LP drastically decreases. Labels who are pressing, let's say, 10,000 or 20,000 of a mainstream title that they're going to get distributed worldwide through distribution channels, that record could maybe cost them $5. All in, $5 to $7, all in for the jacket, the LP, the shrink wrap, the hype sticker, everything you want. It could be $5 to $7 if there are thousands being made. So that's kind of a ballpark. Low end, more collectible, limited edition, you're looking at $10 to $15 a record cost, hard cost. Larger pressings, I would say $2,000 to $3,000 and up. You're talking about $5, $7, $8 to have a record pressed, right? So you're saying major artists, whatever, the Beatles, Pink Floyd, name a big, huge artist, Taylor Swift, whatever it may be. They're basically spending $5 to $7 to have a record pressed. Now, that doesn't take into consideration licensing and artwork and recording fees, design, all those types of things, marketing, sales and distribution. That's where all of the cost comes from. The actual manufacturing of the LP isn't all that expensive, to be honest with you. It's when you add in everything else that completes the whole project. That's when it gets expensive. And again, keep in mind that number I mentioned at the beginning. 100 different people touch a project from start to finish when it's going to come to fruition on vinyl. That's where your cost is. It's all of the manpower. It's all of the people like myself who oversee projects, who have to shepherd it from A all the way to Z. It takes months. I'm talking months to get a lot of this stuff solidified when you start getting into the audio and the design and the proofs and the listening to test pressings. And now there's a blip on one test pressing, so now we got 2 more months. We got to go in and recut it and have another test pressing sent. Artwork got kicked back because there were some changes. Like, this is a big project, right? Every single LP that gets brought to life is an undertaking. It truly is. There are so many steps. There are so many people along the way. So don't let those costs at the manufacturing fool you. Yeah, maybe it only costs $5-7 to produce a single LP that's then getting sold for 30. But how much did the artist have to pay for licensing? How much did they have to pay a graphic designer and a mastering engineer? How much, if it's a new album, how much did they go out of pocket to record that album to begin with? All of that adds, all of that builds, and it's built into the end cost for the consumer. Do I like paying $30, $40, $50 for a new record? No, but the reality is when you add in all those costs, that's what ends up happening. Here's the other thing, and you know this. Artists make no money off of selling records anymore digitally. 90% of the general public, 90% of the music that is consumed today is consumed basically for free. Artists make nothing out of it. So guess what artists are being forced to do? They're being forced to raise their prices to offset that. Well, they're raising it on their records, on their merchandise, on their ticket prices. They're raising it anywhere and every way they can to make a damn living, you know? Again, I'm not talking about the top tier multi-million-dollar artists. I'm talking about working musicians, the vast majority of artists who are trying to make a living, out there busting their butts in vans and tour buses, just trying to get this thing done to keep the dream alive, right? That's what happens. That's what has happened. When you enter digital into this and you take away all of the revenue for artists from the masses who are listening to the music, they're left with these niche projects like records, like t-shirts, like posters, whatever it be, to try and make money from those so they can stay alive. So that's a big part of this too. Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's just reality. You can take the hard cost of what it actually takes to manufacture a record and everything that goes into it as far as the project is concerned. But then you add on top of that the fact that artists have been stripped of other ways, their main way to actually make money, which was selling records when streaming took it all away from them. So now they're forced to bake that into their profit and go, hey, we got to make money in different ways now, whether it be touring, whether it be physical products, things like that. And so keep that all in mind when you're buying a record for $30. You're like, why does this cost so much? I'm tired of spending $30, $35 on this record. Well, that's frustrating, but the artist is trying to stay alive. That's really what this comes down to. 90% of the people who listen to their music anymore don't pay them a dime for it. They don't get anything from Spotify. They don't get anything from Apple Music. Not normal artists, not the top tier, right? Just talking about normal, middle of the road, not even necessarily independent, could be signed bands to, larger indie labels, even major labels for that matter. That's the reality of it. So, keep that in mind next time you're buying a record. It may only cost them $5, $10 to actually produce the record, but everything else that's built into it, that's where the cost comes from. It's frustrating as a consumer because, again, I remember when I used to pay $10, $15 for a record. That's not this anymore. Back when I used to pay $10, $15 for a new record, you know why I was able to pay $10, $15 for a new record? Because there were tens of thousands or millions of people paying for the CD to offset the cost of the record didn't matter. Like, that's why records used to cost. Or if you go back before CD and you used to pay, $7, $10 for a new record, way, back in the 80s, early 90s. Certainly beyond that, you go back and it gets even cheaper. And the reality of that work is because There was no other way to access the music. So they were selling a lot more. When you're selling tens of thousands or millions of a thing, you can price it less. It doesn't matter what it costs to manufacture at that point if you know you can sell tons more. But artists are in that tough spot these days where it's like they make no money off their music after they spend all their time, they put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. Then it's just given away to everybody who wants it for free. And then there's this small niche of collectors like you and me who are willing to pay for a physical product to add it to our collection. And unfortunately, we're the ones that bear the brunt of that. So that's a little details, a little behind the scenes on what it actually costs to produce a record. Again, can be frustrating, but love to hear your opinions on that. Put them in the comments below. Let me know what you think. As always, you can reach me anytime. Just reach out on social media and you can get directly in touch with me if you have any questions. This has been another episode talking about records, and we'll see you again next time.